In the founding vision of the United States, words like liberty, justice, and equality stood as pillars of the new republic. Yet, across the vast lands of North America, the lives of native nations told a very different story. From the early 18th century to the close of the 19th, over 400 treaties were signed between the United States and indigenous tribes. These treaties promised peace, protection, land rights, and mutual respect. But behind the ink on parchment lay a tragic reality. Promises made were almost always promises broken. Before we continue, if you value deep and untold stories of history, consider subscribing to this channel. It allows us to bring you more research, more truth, and more lessons from the past that deserve to be remembered. The first great wave of treaties came after American independence, when the young republic needed legitimacy and peace with native nations. Leaders like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson declared that treaties with tribes would be honored as sacred contracts. In fact, the U.S. Constitution itself recognized treaties as the supreme law of the land. On paper, this recognition placed native nations on equal footing with foreign powers. In practice, it created an illusion of sovereignty, acknowledging tribes as independent while steadily undermining their rights. The Treaty of Hopewell in 1785 set the tone. It promised the Cherokee Nation their lands and protection under U.S. law. Yet even before the ink dried, settlers flooded Cherokee territory. Violence followed, and the U.S. did little to stop it. It was the beginning of a pattern: promises written, trust betrayed. As America expanded westward, the appetite for land grew insatiable. The Louisiana Purchase, the War of 1812, and the dream of manifest destiny placed native homelands directly in the path of an ambitious nation. Treaties became tools of dispossession. Tribal leaders, often under immense pressure, signed agreements ceding millions of acres. The United States promised compensation, supplies, and eternal recognition of the lands that remained. Rarely did those promises last more than a generation. The Cherokee story illustrates the heartbreak. In the 1830s, despite Supreme Court rulings affirming their rights, the U.S. government forced the Cherokee off their ancestral lands through the Treaty of New Dakota. That treaty, signed by only a small faction of the tribe, was used to justify the infamous Trail of Tears. Thousands died on the forced march west. Justice, in this case, was not only denied but weaponized. The Dakota Sioux faced a similar fate. In 1851, the treaties of Traverse Day, Sioux and Mendota confined them to reservations in Minnesota in exchange for promised annuities and supplies, but corruption and delays left the Dakota starving. In desperation, they rose in revolt in 1862, sparking the U.S.-Dakota War. The result was brutal: mass executions, expulsions, and yet another broken treaty. One Dakota elder would later say, "We signed away our lands in hope of peace, but peace never came." Perhaps the most infamous betrayal came with the Lakota Sioux and the Black Hills. The Treaty of Fort Laramie in 1868 guaranteed the Sioux ownership of the Black Hills, a region sacred to their people. Yet when gold was discovered there in the 1870s, miners poured in. The government, rather than enforcing the treaty, demanded the Sioux sell their land. When they refused, war followed. The defeat of Custer at the Battle of the Little Bighorn gave the Sioux a brief victory, but ultimately, the U.S. seized the Black Hills anyway. In 1980, the Supreme Court acknowledged this theft, ruling that the land was taken illegally. Yet the Sioux still wait for justice, refusing billions in compensation for land they consider priceless. Each broken treaty carried not just political consequences, but human ones. Families uprooted, nations starved, cultures suppressed. By the end of the 19th century, Native Americans had lost over 90% of their original lands. What began as a relationship of negotiation had turned into one of domination. But the story of the broken treaties is not only one of betrayal, it is also one of resilience. Despite the losses, Native nations have endured. Their languages, traditions, and sovereignty survive against all odds. Today, tribes continue to fight in courts and in Congress for recognition of their treaty rights. The struggle for the Black Hills, the battle for fishing rights in the Pacific Northwest, and countless other cases prove that these treaties remain living documents. What lessons do these broken promises leave us with? First, that justice without accountability is fragile. The United States proclaimed itself a nation of laws, yet too often failed to uphold its own word. Second, that progress built on dispossession leaves scars that last for centuries. And third, that resilience is born from survival. Native nations, though battered, still stand. The story of America's treaties with Native peoples is a mirror reflecting both the ideals the nation claimed to uphold and the realities it too often ignored. To remember the broken treaties is not to dwell on the past alone, but to understand the foundation upon which the present rests. Only then can the promise of American liberty, justice, equality move closer to reality for all.